My name is Vivian Price. I'm a former union electrician. Colleague John is talking about type trays. Been involved with the tradeswomen movement for quite a few years, as well as being a labor activist. So I was interested in trying to provide a look at U.S. Call this a study in a polarized country with ambivalent climate action. Because we do have a lot of problems with states that can't be emphasized enough in view of our election in a couple of weeks. I'm going to say trying to my most boring slide. It has all the pertinent information in it, but we have state and federal government supervising registered apprenticeships. Vocational education and training programs are jointly run by by the unions and the employers. They're funded similarly to Canada with contributions from the members matched by employers based on negotiated contract clauses. We share a lot with English Canada, except that we don't have much government funding. It's organized by trade, unlike in many places. Europe, as you've heard, and 80% of the training is on the job, while 20% is classroom and workshop hours, generally 3 to 5 years. And this is, I try to keep my ear, to the network. And I've heard from many of my friends. A friend of mine is now teaching in Las Vegas, teaching electricians in Las Vegas. And I have other friends who are working with apprentices in other areas in the United States. Things are on the ground are changing. There's a lot of demand for apprentices, but then there's sometimes it gets a little sketchy. So there are standards, but from my apprenticeship back many years ago, it's a very thorough. And yet again, it depends on what state you're in. We have a lot of right to work states. So differences from Canada, there's far less government funding. There's a lot of more responsibility on workers, unions, and employers to train the workforce. There's no form of national testing. We don't have a red seal. But some of the trades have a national test. And it's less connected to trade high schools and colleges, although there is some, again, it depends on the state, the county, whether you're going to get credit for your apprenticeship towards college, whether it's actually taking place in a union hall or union training center or in a most trades have centralized curriculum development, and they sometimes work together with these colleges. Non-union apprenticeships are very important. They mimic union training, but they are neither mandatory nor comprehensive. There are many organizations that are like this. A friend of mine, a son who's an electrician in Oregon, and he bitterly complains of the lack of supervision of his training, to see that he's actually getting the training that he needs. Now, that's not that that doesn't happen in the union apprenticeship too, but it's that there's use of apprentices, say, as mules to carry heavy objects, and most of you will understand. How did we conduct research in the by we, I mean me. It was a one-person show. Looked at, what are the best practices, incorporate concepts of climate, and that's kind of a foreign word to most union apprentices and apprenticeship training instructors. Up until very recently, it was a hot button issue to even talk about climate change. And it really depended on whether people felt that it was politically correct and useful to talk about climate. Some trades, energy efficiency, et cetera, or the buzzwords. Then also, how is equity integrated in climate literacy? The idea of equity is also one of those things where, as both John and Linda pointed out, it's very important to think about. We're not just talking about skills or keeping a job or making profit for contractors. We're talking about the next generation. We're talking about building equality into our communities, because with growing inequality, together with climate change, we're seeing so many problems that unions themselves are under attack. So these things are comprehensive, interconnected systems. Discussing equity is also, again, something we need to really integrate into our thinking about literacy. So I contacted many training directors, college and high school vocational labor leaders, employers, and some of the agencies. Visited centers and observed training centers and analyzed the data. And I'll just also mention I really use the Old Girls Network because it was hard to get training directors' attention. So fortunately, I have a great network who people who've been in the trades for a long time. Women have become curriculum developers in many of the trades, have become involved in high echelons of training. And so I was able to contact them and get information that was really hard to get. So the outcomes were about creating curriculum. So these are the organizations I contacted. I spoke to people. People gave me some great information. The National Association of Building Trades Unions, the U.S. arm of CBTU, the laborers, frost insulators, painters, and allied IBW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. We like to say Brotherhood and Sisterhood of Electrical Workers. Urban Green, very important because they've developed curriculum that G-Pro that a lot of unions, some unions have benefited from, and really also involved in promoting legislation for to address climate change. SMART, the sheet metal union, operating engineers, pipe fitters, and plumbers. The Department of California Apprenticeship Standards, and then the Climate Jobs Institute of Cornell University. And all of those organizations gave me some really interesting ideas and accounts. And if there are any questions about what individual groups are doing, I'd be happy. So in terms of a site visit, this work was done under COVID. I don't know if we've mentioned that, but that was really another challenging point of getting to have face-to-face meetings or see what's happening on the ground. And as we know, telephone or Zoom conversations are one thing, but actually witnessing is another. So I had the good fortune of having COVID sort of diminish, and it allowed me to visit Chicago's Plumbers Union 3-day Clean Energy Forum, a national effort to bring together contract elected officials. And it was held during their UA Sustainable Technology Train the Trainers, but also featured the Urban Greens G-Pro. So I could actually see how it was presented, what the trainers did with it. You know, it was a very active, engaged event where I could talk to people, you know, over coffee and other adult refreshments and hear a little bit more about dealing with this in Florida and Texas. Trailer where they take this to different places and show people about geothermal technology. Contractors could say, yes, you know, these union plumbers can perform this work. Then they could feel more confident about bidding on these jobs. So 6 themes emerge from the interviews. Building trade unions are developing or expanding vet for low carbon jobs, primarily skills oriented. They advocate for legislation for low carbon jobs. Policy is key, as we've been saying, to incentivize sustainable construction. They join with community coalitions to pass legislation with steps towards a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive society, are ambivalent or opposed to legislation that limits fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel employment. They recognize that climate jobs appeal to broader numbers of people, especially the youth, and possibly can strengthen labor movement. My last slides address these. So we can see that some of the ways that trades are demonstrating their interest in climate literacy is that they embody them in their training centers by having solar panels, or as I showed the training, the mobile trailers, or the iron workers in the East Coast had wind turbines at their training center. So it becomes not only a symbol, but a way to train people. So have textbooks that are developed either by third-party stations or internally of their own curriculum. They also advocate, and I remember, hearing from many of the trades how much advocate legislation for green jobs, and they're very involved in Washington in trying to get that nationally. But they're also working. Here we have the Inflation Reduction Act that incentivizes prevailing wages and union jobs. So we have in the United States PLAs, the project labor agreements, and that's sort of the bread and butter of the trades to make sure that there's labor standards, union wages, and benefits. That way people will get a good certified trained tradespeople as well as unions, having non-union contractors be signatory. This is the key to the way unions have having opportunities to participate in long time and continue on the city, this local, the state level, that there are laws that are passed that incentivize the state funding or funding of IRA. There's no registered apprenticeships, but there's tax incentives for employers to do so. It's very indirect and not always successful. The lobbying that has to take place, jobs, equitable, sustainable society, working towards community benefits is another one where that community groups that partner with trades and provide, again, in the IRA, there's tax incentives if you partner with a community organization and then you are training underrepresented groups, whether it's marginalized groups and underrepresented groups or low income groups who can then become the tradespeople of the future. They work towards a more inclusive workforce. And then some organizations, some unions work with labor rights at the border. We'll talk a little bit about this, but there are very few building trade really problems of unequal workforce and the fact that we have a very low union density and that the market share that unions had back in the 1950s has, really plummeted and ignore the fact that folks of color and particularly Latino immigrants are working in construction and other trades, other apprenticeship trades, and we neglect them at our peril. So some organizations, W Local 520 out of Austin, has worked with the Workers' Defense Project to really make sure that there's outreach to Latinos. So building trade unions recognize that climate jobs appeal to broad numbers of people, especially the craft core curriculum. So the pre-apprenticeships are very important. That is sponsored by the building trades throughout the United States, but it's also not present everywhere, and people have to sign on to it. They have to build. And what also stands in our way is that many building trade unions are ambivalent. So American Petroleum Institute and APTU actually have a coalition. Prevent taxing oil companies or restrict a quote for fear of losing jobs. So we do have a lot of jobs in the petroleum industry. Where you are in the United States, right? You're going to a refinery. Those are really good jobs. They're high-paid jobs. They're high labor standards. They're very dangerous jobs. I've worked in a refinery, and the refineries are being closed. We're losing work in refineries. But like with my cold, dead hands, we're kind of clutching onto these jobs. And these are really difficult politics of, do you advocate for carbon capture? Does that prolong the life of, the gas and oil industry? Does it give us jobs? Is it really possible economically to fire to using, again, another whole red herring that I talk to many people who say, solar jobs are not really that great. They're not as good as refinery jobs because you do a lot of grunt work. We have to really be honest, about what we're dealing with and how that affects people. So climate training and jobs may promote union renewal and labor movement if we really take it seriously and we think about what climate literacy body. There's a state-by-state construction industry union. You can see that in many states, it's definitely it doesn't even amount to 6%. So we're lucky in California and in Washington and Oregon and in some places on the East Coast, but there's many, and also in the Midwest in the North. But there's many places that have very low union density. So you can ask, what would a just transition for construction workers look like if fossil? So we've got things like retrofit to think about, as well as building these coalitions with different organizations. Think about what we want our society to look like. How do we work with indigenous groups? How do we work with community organizations to build coalitions that are forward thinking, to think of the next 7 generations, and not just think about today? Last slide is something at and ponder. Imagining here circle of advocacy for change that deals with government policy, overcoming fossil fuel, involving contractors, addressing the right to work states, working on the idea that everybody not only has a right to work, but a right to work for good wages. thinking about how to build with other coalitions, embedding climate literacy in vocational education, increasing climate consciousness and engagement, building equity for healthy labor standards, building popular movements to promote climate change, and listening to the science, public pressure, action to reduce. Thank you very much.